For generations, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi has stood as an unassailable titan of peace, a beacon of non-violence whose philosophy inspired civil rights movements across the globe. His image, synonymous with moral fortitude, is etched into our collective consciousness. But what if this cherished portrait, so meticulously painted, has overlooked certain, less flattering strokes? We celebrate the Mahatma, the great soul, the architect of India's independence. Yet beneath the layers of veneration, whispers persist, uncomfortable truths about a younger Gandhi, a man who, during his formative years in South Africa, articulated views that, by today's standards, are undeniably racist. Our journey begins not in the ashrams of India, but in the vibrant, often brutal landscape of late 19th century South Africa. A young, ambitious lawyer named Mohandas Gandhi arrived here in 1893, seeking opportunity and, perhaps, a clearer understanding of injustice. But whose injustice did he truly champion? Gandhi's fight in South Africa is famously for the rights of Indians, a marginalized community facing severe discrimination under British and Boer rule. He coined the term satyagraha, truth force, a revolutionary method of non-violent resistance. This is the narrative we know, but the untold part of this story lies in how he positioned the Indian struggle in relation to the struggle of native Africans. Consider his own words from Indian Opinion, a newspaper he founded. "We were then marched off to a distant ward reserved for Kafirs." The term Kafir, a derogatory slur for black Africans, was frequently used in his early writings. This wasn't an isolated incident. When we examine Gandhi's early writings, particularly from his South African period, we encounter a recurring pattern. He consistently sought to differentiate the Indian community from the native African population, often positioning Indians as a superior, civilized group deserving of better treatment from the British. Gandhi's concern was largely, if not exclusively, for the Indian community. He saw Africans as primitive, uncultured, even a threat. His activism at that time was steeped in a colonial understanding of racial hierarchy. He wanted Indians to be treated like Europeans, not like Africans. He respectfully but firmly argued to British officials that the Indian community, loyal subjects of the empire, possessed a level of civilization, cleanliness, and industriousness that frankly could not be compared to the Kafirs. "We are not savages," he would assert. "We are merchants, artisans, educated professionals. We deserve to be treated with dignity, not herded into locations meant for natives." This wasn't merely a strategic maneuver. It reflected a deeply ingrained prejudice, a product of his upbringing in colonial India and the prevailing racial attitudes of the time. He advocated for separate entrances, separate facilities, and even separate political representation for Indians, distinct from black Africans. Part 2 of this story begins by exploring the very real suffering of the Indian community in South Africa, which Gandhi passionately addressed. They faced oppressive taxes, denial of voting rights, severe restrictions on movement, and rampant physical abuse. Gandhi's early experiences, like being thrown off a train for refusing to move from a whites-only carriage, profoundly shaped his understanding of racial injustice. These incidents fueled his determination to fight for Indian rights, and his methods of non-violent resistance proved remarkably effective, laying the groundwork for his later work in India. However, during this period, his empathy for Indians often overshadowed or perhaps excluded the plight of black Africans. For instance, in 1904, when the Natal government proposed placing Indians alongside Africans in segregated living areas, Gandhi vehemently opposed it, arguing that Indians, being more advanced, should not be subjected to such an indignity. He wrote, "We believe that the Europeans will find it to their advantage to treat the Asiatics as a body of immigrants who would not naturally mix with the Kafirs." This stance was not just about seeking better conditions for Indians. It was rooted in a hierarchical view of races, where Indians occupied a position above Africans. His participation in the Zulu Rebellion of 1906 further illuminates this complex aspect of his early life. While often presented as a selfless act of medical service, Gandhi volunteered to form an Indian ambulance corps to assist the British forces. The rebellion itself was a brutal suppression of a Zulu uprising against a poll tax, resulting in thousands of Zulu deaths. Gandhi's stated purpose was to demonstrate Indian loyalty to the British Empire, hoping it would lead to greater rights for Indians. He witnessed firsthand the British military's harsh treatment of the Zulus, yet his writings from this period show little condemnation of the violence against Africans. Instead, he expressed admiration for the efficiency of the British forces and the bravery of the Indian stretcher-bearers who, as he saw it, were serving the empire. Some critics argue this was a calculated move to elevate the status of Indians by aligning them with the colonial power against the native population, even if it meant participating in their subjugation. This period highlights a significant tension. Gandhi's commitment to non-violence for Indians did not, at this time, extend to a universal application of that principle, particularly when it came to the struggles of black Africans. He did not advocate for the rights of the Zulus, nor did he protest the British atrocities against them. His focus remained squarely on the advancement of the Indian community. As we move forward, it is crucial to understand the historical context of Gandhi's views. The late 19th and early 20th centuries were periods deeply steeped in social Darwinism and racial hierarchies. The British Empire, like other colonial powers, operated on the premise of white superiority, with other races categorized and treated accordingly. Gandhi, despite being a victim of colonialism himself, was also a product of this environment. He grew up in an India under British rule, where caste systems and racial distinctions were already ingrained. His education and exposure often reinforced these existing ideas. Many Indians, to gain favor or better treatment from their colonial masters, adopted similar prejudiced views against those deemed lower on the racial totem pole, namely black Africans. It's not an excuse for his early statements, but it offers a lens through which to understand how such views could be held by someone who would later become a champion of human rights. However, simply dismissing his early racism as a product of his time is insufficient. Many of his contemporaries, both Indian and European, held more egalitarian views or actively fought for the rights of all oppressed people. What is significant is the persistence of these views in his early public statements and actions. It's not about an isolated remark, but a consistent pattern of differentiation and implicit, if not explicit, claims of Indian superiority over Africans. This often created a chasm between the Indian and African communities in South Africa, a divide that some argue had lasting negative consequences for a unified anti-apartheid movement. His focus on Indian advancement, while understandable from his community's perspective, did not contribute to a broader solidarity among the oppressed. This is a critical point that challenges the simplistic narrative of Gandhi as a universally enlightened figure from the outset. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that even revered icons can have deeply flawed beginnings. Part 3 delves into the arguments of those who defend Gandhi, or at least seek to contextualize his early views. They often emphasize that Gandhi's perspective was not static, it evolved over time. They argue that his experiences in South Africa, particularly his deeper engagement with injustice and the complexities of human suffering, broadened his understanding of oppression beyond just the Indian community. By the time he left South Africa in 1914, and certainly during his later years in India, his philosophy of satyagraha had become more universal in its application. He began to speak more broadly about the rights of all oppressed people, regardless of race or creed. Proponents point to his later solidarity with other marginalized groups globally as evidence of his growth. They suggest that judging his entire legacy solely on his early South African pronouncements is unfair and ignores the profound transformation he underwent. One key argument is that Gandhi was a pragmatist. In the harsh racial landscape of South Africa, his primary goal was to secure rights and dignity for the Indian minority, who were suffering immense discrimination. By attempting to differentiate Indians from Africans, he was, in their view, trying to secure a better position for his community within the existing colonial hierarchy, rather than dismantling the hierarchy itself at that early stage. This was a strategic calculation, albeit one that relied on problematic racial distinctions. They contend that his statements, while regrettable, were part of a larger, incremental struggle for liberation. Furthermore, some defenders highlight that Gandhi did interact with some black African leaders and thinkers during his time in South Africa, suggesting a nascent, if limited, engagement with their struggles. However, documented evidence of sustained and meaningful collaboration or advocacy for black African rights from his early period remains scarce. Another defense suggests that Gandhi's views were a product of his Indian upbringing, where caste distinctions and hierarchies were prevalent. While this is not an excuse for racism, it helps explain how he might have internalized and projected hierarchical thinking onto racial groups in a new colonial context. His views on cleanliness and civilization often mirrored the prejudices he observed in the British against Indians, which he then, ironically, applied to Africans. It's a complex interplay of internalized colonialism and pre-existing social structures from his homeland. The argument here is not to absolve him, but to understand the intricate web of influences that shaped his early worldview. This perspective encourages a more nuanced understanding of how individuals, even those who become great moral leaders, are shaped by their environments and must often embark on a journey of self-correction and growth. However, the question remains, was this evolution sufficient to truly reconcile with his earlier views? And did his later universalism fully erase the impact of his early discriminatory statements on the relationship between Indian and black communities in South Africa? While his later life undoubtedly shows a more inclusive approach, the initial phase represents a significant ethical challenge to his unblemished image. It forces us to grapple with the discomfort of acknowledging flaws in figures we revere. This is not about tearing down an icon, but about constructing a more truthful and complete historical narrative. The defense of his evolution highlights his capacity for growth, but it does not negate the existence of his early prejudices. It simply shifts the focus to the trajectory of his moral development, rather than presenting him as a fully formed ethical paragon from the start. Part 4 will delve into the profound and lasting impact of Gandhi's early views on the relationship between Indian and black communities in South Africa, a legacy that continues to be debated and felt today. While Gandhi is celebrated globally for his anti-colonial struggle, in South Africa his image is far more complex, often tainted by these early racial sentiments. Many black South Africans, particularly those involved in the anti-apartheid movement, found his early writings and actions to be deeply offensive and divisive. They felt that Gandhi, who himself experienced severe racial discrimination, failed to extend solidarity to the indigenous people who suffered under an even more brutal system. This perception that Indians were more concerned with their own upliftment than with the collective liberation of all oppressed groups created a historical wedge. The argument is made that Gandhi's approach inadvertently contributed to the divide and rule strategy employed by colonial powers. By emphasizing the distinctiveness and, arguably, the superiority of Indians, he made it easier for the British authorities to maintain separate systems of oppression rather than fostering a unified front of resistance. This historical separation arguably hindered the development of a strong, unified anti-apartheid movement earlier in the 20th century, though it's important to note that collaboration between Indian and black leaders did emerge later. For example, prominent figures in the African National Congress, ANC, often expressed frustration with Gandhi's early indifference to their plight. Nelson Mandela, while acknowledging Gandhi's immense influence on non-violent resistance, also highlighted the historical friction and the need for a more inclusive struggle. Beyond historical perceptions, there are ongoing debates about Gandhi's statues and memorials in South Africa. In recent years, there have been calls and even actions to remove statues of Gandhi, particularly from university campuses due to the controversy surrounding his early racist remarks. Students and activists argue that honoring a figure with such a problematic past is disrespectful to the struggles of black South Africans and perpetuates a whitewashed version of history. These protests reflect a deeper societal grappling with the legacy of colonialism and racial injustice and how historical figures are commemorated. The presence of these statues becomes a flashpoint for discussing whose history is prioritized and whose narratives are suppressed. It forces a critical examination of what it means to be an icon and whether such figures should be judged by modern ethical standards. The controversy also extends to the very term indentured laborers, used to describe the Indians brought to South Africa, which Gandhi himself used, in contrast to the term coolies, which he found demeaning. However, critics point out that this distinction, while important for Indians, did not extend to challenging the broader system of forced labor or racial classification that affected all non-white populations. The ongoing debate in South Africa serves as a powerful reminder that history is not static. It is constantly re-evaluated through contemporary lenses. The unearthing of Gandhi's early racism is not an attempt to erase his contributions to non-violent resistance, but to enrich and complicate our understanding of a monumental figure. It forces us to acknowledge that even those who inspire millions can be flawed, and that true progress often involves confronting uncomfortable truths about our heroes. Part 5 of our exploration brings us to a critical juncture. How does this hidden face of Gandhi affect his overall legacy? Does his early racism negate his monumental contributions to non-violent resistance and India's independence? Or does it add a layer of complexity that demands a more nuanced understanding of his journey? The answer, as with many complex historical figures, is rarely black and white. On one hand, the principles of satyagraha and ahimsa, non-violence, which Gandhi championed, transcended his personal failings and became universal tools for liberation movements worldwide. Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela, and countless others drew inspiration from Gandhi's methods, applying them to fight against racial segregation and injustice in their own contexts. The power of non-violent civil disobedience, as demonstrated by Gandhi, remains an undeniable force for change, regardless of the personal prejudices he may have held early in his life. His impact on the philosophy and practice of peaceful resistance is indisputable. However, acknowledging his early racism is essential for a complete and honest historical account. It allows us to move beyond hagiography and to understand that even great leaders are human, subject to the prejudices of their time and capable of personal growth. It challenges the notion of flawless heroes and instead presents a more realistic, albeit less comfortable portrayal. This critical perspective is vital for historical integrity and for learning from the past in its entirety, not just the sanitized versions. By confronting these difficult aspects of Gandhi's early life, we can engage in a more robust discussion about how individual biases can intersect with broader struggles for justice, and how even those fighting for liberation can inadvertently perpetuate other forms of oppression. This nuance allows for a deeper appreciation of the complexities of social change and personal transformation. Furthermore, This examination encourages us to consider the ongoing responsibility of societies to critically assess their historical figures and monuments. The debates in South Africa surrounding Gandhi's statues are not simply about a man from the past. They are about contemporary issues of racial equality, historical memory, and whose voices are heard in the public sphere. They highlight the importance of inclusive historical narratives that reflect the experiences of all people, particularly those who have been marginalized or silenced. The discomfort these discussions provoke is often a sign of progress, signaling a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths and move towards a more equitable understanding of history. It reminds us that icons, no matter how revered, are not immune to scrutiny, and that their legacies must be continually re-evaluated in light of new evidence and evolving ethical standards. Ultimately, the question, "Gandhi was racist," doesn't seek to condemn him entirely, but rather to understand the full scope of his complex humanity. It challenges us to hold contradictory ideas simultaneously, recognizing his profound influence on non-violent resistance while acknowledging his early, deeply problematic racial views. His journey serves as a powerful reminder that moral evolution is possible, even for those who start from a place of prejudice. It also underscores the importance of universalizing the fight for justice, ensuring that the struggle for liberation truly encompasses all oppressed people without creating new hierarchies or leaving anyone behind. The ongoing conversation about Gandhi's early views is a testament to the enduring power of historical inquiry and its capacity to illuminate the often unseen dimensions of even the most iconic figures. Part 6 continues this nuanced examination by focusing on the later evolution of Gandhi's views, particularly after he returned to India in 1915. While his early South African period reveals undeniable racial prejudices, it's also important to consider how his experiences shaped his subsequent, more universal philosophy of satyagraha. As he immersed himself in the complexities of India's independence movement, facing British oppression on a much larger scale, his understanding of interconnected injustices seemingly deepened. His activism in India began to encompass broader issues of poverty, untouchability, and communal harmony, suggesting a widening of his moral compass beyond the specific concerns of the Indian diaspora in South Africa. This period saw him advocating for the rights of the Dalits, the so-called untouchables, a group often considered the lowest rung of the Indian caste system. This particular struggle, while distinct from racial discrimination against black Africans, demonstrates a growing commitment to the rights of the most marginalized and oppressed within his own society. His fight against untouchability can be seen as a profound rejection of ingrained prejudice, a shift that suggests a capacity for growth and a challenge to his own earlier hierarchical thinking. However, even in his later life, some critics argue that a lingering echo of his early prejudices could be found in certain attitudes, or perhaps a lack of proactive engagement with issues far removed from India's immediate concerns. While he became a global symbol of anti-colonialism, his direct involvement in or explicit statements on the struggles of black Africans post-1914 were less pronounced than his focus on India. This isn't to say he ceased to care about universal justice, but his primary efforts and rhetoric naturally centered on the immense challenges within his own country. Defenders might argue that his life's work was immense and he could not personally engage with every global struggle, but the contrast with his earlier, more direct and often negative statements about Africans remains a point of contention for some historians and activists. It forces us to ask whether a shift in focus constitutes a complete ideological transformation. The discussion about Gandhi's racism also serves as a crucial lens through which to view the concept of moral consistency in public figures. Is it fair to expect perfect moral consistency from anyone, let alone a figure whose life spanned such tumultuous and rapidly changing eras? Or is it more realistic to acknowledge that individuals, even those who rise to great moral heights, are products of their time and undergo processes of evolution, sometimes imperfectly? This complex question challenges us to move beyond simplistic judgments and embrace the messiness of human development. It suggests that a person's legacy is not just about their peak achievements, but also about the journey of their intellectual and ethical growth, including the missteps along the way. Understanding Gandhi's early views does not necessarily diminish his later contributions, but it certainly contextualizes them and provides a more complete picture of the man. The ongoing conversation about Gandhi's early prejudices ultimately enriches our understanding of history and the complexities of human nature. It reminds us that heroism is not always a seamless, unblemished narrative. Instead, it can be a path of growth, struggle, and, at times, contradiction. By openly discussing these uncomfortable truths, we contribute to a more honest and inclusive historical dialogue, one that acknowledges the imperfections of even our most revered figures, while still drawing inspiration from their ultimate achievements. This approach encourages a deeper engagement with history, moving beyond simplistic narratives to embrace the full, multifaceted reality of the past. Part 7 concludes our journey, synthesizing the complexities of Gandhi's legacy and offering a final reflection on the question, was Gandhi racist? The answer, as we've explored, is not a simple yes or no. In his early years in South Africa, particularly from 1893 to around 1906, the evidence strongly suggests that Mohandas Gandhi held and articulated views that, by any contemporary ethical standard, were indeed racist. He used derogatory language, advocated for the segregation of Indians from black Africans, and expressed a hierarchical understanding of races, positioning Indians as superior. His actions during the Zulu rebellion, while presented as service to the empire, also occurred within a framework that implicitly, if not explicitly, supported colonial subjugation of native Africans. These are uncomfortable truths that cannot be ignored or easily dismissed as mere strategic maneuvers. They reflect a period of his life where his empathy and activism were narrowly focused on the Indian community, often at the expense of solidarity with other marginalized groups. However, to leave the answer, there would be an incomplete picture. The same man who held these views also underwent a significant moral and philosophical evolution. After his return to India, and certainly throughout his later leadership of the independence movement, his philosophy of satyagraha broadened to encompass a more universal fight against injustice and oppression. His commitment to nonviolence became more absolute, and his advocacy for the rights of the marginalized extended to the Dalits in India, demonstrating a capacity for profound growth and a challenging of his own previously held prejudices. This later Gandhi, the Mahatma, became a global symbol of peace and civil rights, inspiring movements worldwide that directly fought against racial discrimination. His impact on figures like Martin Luther King Jr. and Nelson Mandela is undeniable, highlighting the transformative power of his later teachings. Therefore, the most accurate answer is nuanced. Yes, the early Gandhi exhibited racist tendencies and articulated racist views, but he was also a figure capable of significant moral evolution and growth. His legacy is not a monolithic block, but a complex tapestry woven with both admirable achievements and problematic elements. Acknowledging his early flaws does not diminish the immense positive impact he had on the world, but it provides a more authentic and human portrayal. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that even revered icons are imperfect, and that the journey towards moral enlightenment is often a winding one, marked by missteps and self-correction. This deeper understanding allows for a richer, more critical engagement with history, one that values truth over idealized narratives. The ongoing debates in South Africa and elsewhere about Gandhi's statues and his legacy serve as a powerful reminder of the importance of historical honesty. They are not merely attempts to cancel a historical figure, but rather to ensure that historical narratives are inclusive, representative, and acknowledge the full spectrum of human experience, including the experiences of those who were marginalized or harmed by the views of powerful figures. By openly discussing these complexities, we foster a more mature understanding of history and its continuing relevance to contemporary issues of race, justice, and human rights. Ultimately, the story of Gandhi's hidden face is a testament to the ongoing human struggle for perfection and the enduring challenge of confronting our own biases, even when held by those we deeply admire. This comprehensive view of Gandhi's journey, with its shadows and its light, offers profound lessons for us all. If you've made it this far, it's because, like us, you're not afraid to delve into the depths of history, question what once seemed unquestionable, and uncover the hidden layers of even the greatest icons. If this journey through Gandhi, the man and the myth, has made you think, raised new questions, or simply kept you curious, then we have much more to explore together. Like this video if the discussion touched you in any way, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. By subscribing, you're not only supporting us in continuing to bring you content like this, stories that challenge, inform, and make us see the world from a richer perspective, but you're also ensuring that you don't miss out on future investigations. We want to build a community that values complexity, nuance, and the relentless pursuit of truth. Join us on this journey of discovery and debate that truly matters. Your curiosity is our fuel.